Hard talk is slumming it in Hollywood this week as the movie industry waits to discover who's won this year's Oscars. Well, my guest today doesn't need to wait. He already knows he's won an award for lifetime achievement, and about time too. Think of a great movie and the chances are he's probably directed it, with titles as varied as In the Heat of the Night and Fiddler on the Roof. So if he isn't concerned about prizes, what does worry him these days? And why does he think that Hollywood itself has finally lost the plot? Norman Jewison, a very warm welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
Did we take you away from a tennis game or you just
finished it? No, the first tennis game since last November. I've been shooting a picture until a week ago, last Saturday. I was shooting in New York with 150 extras and Denzel Washington and the entire police force of New York, I think. It was a wild shoot.
Which is more exhausting, playing tennis or directing?
Yeah, I was lucky today. I had the pro, so we won. Not because of me. So I drew the pro, so it's always fun to play with someone who really knows what they're doing.
You once said, "I don't believe in festivals or prizes," which is a strange thing for a man to say who's won so many prizes in so many fields. Is that really the way you think?
Well, it's like running a race when you're a kid, you know. If you lose the three-legged race, then it's a kind of a rejection in a way. Winning isn't everything. It's my British upbringing. I don't know. I think the work is what's really gives me the buzz. I don't think prizes. The Academy Award is wonderful if you win it. I think to be nominated by the Academy is a great accolade from your peers because, as you know, the nominations only come from your own peer group. Actors are nominated by actors, and directors are nominated by directors, and cinematographers are nominated by cinematographers. Therefore, I think there's five winners every year. But unfortunately, I often see a film that I think deserves to be one of those fives. So I think prizes skew the reality, if indeed film is an art. You don't give prizes to paintings. You don't give prizes to sculpture. Occasionally, I guess you do.
You give prices, don't you?
Prices. How about that? Yeah, I believe in the marketplace. I believe films that endure, films that last.
Not just box office hits.
No, box office hits. Come on, that's a joke that the media has perpetrated on the world at the moment. Top grossing this, lowest grossing this, top rating, lowest rating. What kind of a world do we live in that's filled with such hype and nonsense? It's all nonsense. It's bullshit. The highest grossing film isn't necessarily the best film. The highest selling book isn't necessarily the best book. So why does the media jump on this? And the media perpetuates this nonsense. You can read the top grossing films in every newspaper in North America. That never used to be.
But we're all slave to budgets. You're slave to budgets. Art
we're all
slave
slave
to
to hype and control. And I'm sure the BBC is part of that. To have access to information is power today. And I only have power at this moment because I'm on your show. That gives me power to say what I feel. But unfortunately, power is misused because the world of information is now being controlled in many ways by multinational corporations, multi-global corporations. They control what we see, they control what we hear, and eventually they'll control what we think.
And that was the background for Rollerball, wasn't it? Really?
Yes, sir. That's why I made Rollerball.
You were really scared about that, weren't you?
I am scared. I'm scared of corporate control. When political systems fail, when all political systems fail, there will be no wars. There will be no poverty. But there will be Rollerball.
It was sad, wasn't it, that actually some corporations even tried to set up something like that, didn't they? I mean, your idea had been nobody should ever have a game, like nobody should ever live their lives like this because it was set in the future. It was 2018, wasn't it?
Well, it was, I said sometime in the distant future. It was the only film I made about the future. I'm not that
And it was this
interested.
ghastly game for the consumers where people died at the end.
Oh, sure. It's Circus Maximus.
But some corporations actually latched onto this and said, well, we want something similar.
They
Not people
love it.
dying, but they
Listen,
love
some of the
competition.
top-rated shows now on American networks are a series of deaths. You can see people killed. In reality, real deaths. In other words, let's put together all the automobile accidents we can find. Let's put together people falling off mountains. Let's put together all the disaster moments we can see and put them all together, and it'll be a top-rated show. People will watch this.
It's sick, isn't it?
It's obscene. It's obscene. The exploitation of violence for the entertainment of the masses is an obscene thought.
But
That's why I made Rollerball.
But Hollywood connives at that, doesn't it?
Oh, Hollywood is only interested in money. The studios are only interested in the highest rating for the highest buck and the highest return. You know that.
Hating these studios and multinational corporations, you worked with them for a lifetime.
Well, I don't necessarily hate them. I'm just an observer. I'm a storyteller. My political or ideas or projections is irrelevant to the story. I mean, I'm only interested in stories.
You're interested also in ideas and things that you care about. I mean, you don't subscribe to the old cliche that if you've got a message, send it by Western Union, do you?
No, I think the idea behind the film is what I'm interested in. It's the idea behind a work of art that makes it a work of art. The more you look at that picture, the more you're entranced by the idea behind it. When you finish a good book, it's been a good story. You've been entertained. You didn't want to stop reading, but it's the idea behind the book that stays with you. What is the book about? What's the raison d'etre? Why is it there? If it's there just to entertain you, it may be a hit for a week, but it's not going to be part of your life.
Race was always your big idea, wasn't it? The thing that you cared a lot about.
Well, racial discrimination. You know, this is a country, United States is a country which is built on the freedom of the individual. But it's also a country that's built on slavery. It's a country that's built on racism.
Hence, In the Heat of the Night, which won Best Picture in '67.
Yeah, 67. Timing was right. I was skiing at Sun Valley with my family in 1966, and I met Robert Kennedy and his family. And he asked me what I did, and I told him I was a filmmaker. And I was a big fan of his brothers, and I had worked hard for the Democratic Party, and since I'd came to America in '58 from Canada. So I mentioned to him the story of In the Heat of the Night. And he says, this could be a very important film, Norman. But the timing has got to be right, you know. Timing is everything in politics and in art. And I never forgot that. And he encouraged me while I was making the film. And of course, this is the middle of the civil rights movement in America. I mean, the country was in the throes of a revolution.
The film was huge, wasn't it? Huge impact.
Well, when it won the New York Critics Award, Robert Kennedy was senator from New York, and everyone gathered at Sardi's, and I flew in to accept the award for Best Film from the New York Critics. And who gave out the award but Senator Kennedy? And when I accepted the award, he says, see, I told you the timing was right, Norman. The night he was assassinated in California, some years later, I was with Melina McCoury, and I was shooting a picture with her. She had been expelled from Greece by the junta, and that was the night we were to meet Robert Kennedy. It was one of the reasons, I think, because I found myself marching in Martin Luther King's funeral, and then the death of Robert Kennedy as well as his brother. Reagan was governor, Nixon was president, Vietnam, that's when I lost my faith in the American dream. So I packed up my family and everything else, and I went to London, and I lived in Europe for the next 9 years.
And you don't regret doing that at all? You needed to get away from America?
I was losing my sense of humor. When you lose your sense of humor as a filmmaker, or, you know, humor to me, laughter is just as important as tears. I think every day, there isn't a day that goes by that I don't get hysterically, about something.
Amused or upset?
Amused, just absolutely. I just love to laugh, and there isn't a day goes by that I don't think I shed a tear about something. So I think laughter and tears are part of us, part of our life. And when you lose your sense of humor, you start to lose it, it's time for you to move on. Get out of that milieu, get out of that environment. And so I moved my whole family to Europe.
But here you are, back in Malibu.
Back in Malibu, glorious Malibu, absolutely.
How do you fit in here? You seem much more of a rebel than everybody else who's here. They all toe the line, you don't. Where's the meeting of minds with your neighbors here? All the great stars of Hollywood who live on this strip of the coast.
Well, I'm never here in the summer when it's popular. I'm only here in the winter when the beach is deserted. And a lot of the houses are empty because it's not, this is not the scene here. The scene is in the summer. And in the summer, I'm on my farm in Canada. That's where I call home now. And so I have a big working farm outside Toronto. And so this is where I am when I'm in the United States or in America. You know, Los Angeles is the center of the film business. I mean,
do you like the set? Do you like the people who are here? Do you feel you have anything in common with them? I mean, values, ideas, apart from the fact that you all make movies.
I don't think I'm a loner. I don't think I'm much different than anyone else. I mean, I'm a filmmaker.
You seem to care a bit more than other people.
No, I don't think so. I think there's a lot of writers and directors and actors who care about the conditions in the society in which they live. I think the important thing, and I think why I'm still comfortable here, in a way, is this is where I began. In other words, I made my first film in Hollywood under a studio system at Universal Pictures, and Tony Curtis gave me the opportunity to direct him in a movie. So
40 Pounds of Trouble.
Yeah. So if I hadn't have done that, I wouldn't be a filmmaker. I'd be back in television because I was committed to television at that time. I'd been working in television for many years. So this kind of is the center of filmmaking in the English-speaking world if you're a North American.
You were born 1926 in Toronto.
Yes, sir.
With a very good memory. There was something that you could recite off by heart by the age of 6, something called the shooting of Dan McGrew. What was the shooting of Dan McGrew?
There are strange things done in the midnight sun by the men who moil for gold. And the Arctic trails have their secret tales that would make your blood run cold. And the northern lights have seen queer sights, but the queerest they ever did see was the night on the marge of Lake LaBarge I cremated Sam McGee.
Doesn't go away, does it?
That's pretty good for a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old. And that was the whole idea of it. I guess they just were, the audience was kind of amazed that I was so dramatic and intense with these Robert Service poems.
The audience being your parents and friends and...
No, I performed in halls for people.
But you liked performing, didn't you, from a very early age?
Yeah, I did. I think I liked I guess I liked the applause, liked to be patted on the head. Everybody likes that.
Like the limelight.
Yeah, I think I did like the limelight. I became an actor.
There were tough years, weren't there? Waiting tables and driving cabs.
All of that. Everybody does that. Everybody does that.
Do you ever think back to those days?
The toughest was living on where was it? I was living in London on Inverness Terrace in Mrs. Harris's boarding house.
Paddington.
Near Paddington, right. And
West 2.
Right, and I was living on the top floor in a room with a little gas cooker. You know, one of those little things you put a shilling in. And
so glamorous.
Oh, man, it was tough. It was tough.
And cold.
Cold, I was always cold. But I did a few radio shows for the BBC, and then Bernie Braden. There was a show called Bedtime with Braden, with Barbara Kelly and Bernie Braden. And Braden was a Canadian, and I was a Canadian, so I went and pleaded my case, and he gave me a job, kind of as his stand-in, because he used to run to the booth to direct the show, and so I would do his lines, all of that stuff. Then I started to write a little bit, and I scrambled around and made a living for a couple of years in London.
How important was London to you? I mean, you were working with this venerable organization, the British Broadcasting Corporation. Do you retain, I mean, you don't have to say this just simply because this is a BBC program. Do you retain a certain affection for the BBC?
Absolutely. The old mother, the grand old lady of British broadcasting. I think at that time, the BBC was way ahead of the rest of the world in television, because they were doing shows at Alexandra Palace when nothing was happening in New York. As a matter of fact, television really started kind of in Chicago with Dave Garroway and all of those people. Television in America was much slower to get going. The British were way ahead of everybody, and I think that's why I went.
But you went back to Canada after that.
I went back to Canada.
You did all kinds of shows, didn't you?
Yeah,
Variety,
but I went back with this experience in British television. At least I knew something about how you put together a show. You know, I'd go sit on the Goon Show and all that stuff, and hanging around the BBC, you could go into booths and you could talk to directors and you could write little things. And
exciting times for a young guy.
Yeah, I was a kid. I was in my 20s. And I went back, and then of course, I got a job with the CBC in Canada because we were just going on the air with television.
But they couldn't keep you in the end. You were there for a few years, and then you went
6 years.
To the States.
I went to the States in 1958, but I'd spent 6 years directing, producing, writing, various shows in Canada. Musical shows, most of them. My milieu was music. Jazz shows, variety shows, comedy shows. I was in that ilk, you know, and then CBS brought me down to do the Hit Parade, which was a musical show. And then I did Andy Williams, and then before I knew it, I was doing Belafonte. First black show in America was Tonight.
That was a landmark, wasn't it?
Tonight with Belafonte.
That was a real landmark.
We lost 26 stations.
Lost?
Lost. They went off the air.
How did you feel?
Well, I saw those stations going off the air in the southern part of the country because I think they were rather shocked. It was the first time they'd seen black and white dancers, singers working together, people. I don't know. How did I feel? It was a hell of a show. It won an Emmy, I think.
And broke new ground.
Yeah, I wasn't thinking about breaking new ground as much as I was thinking of trying to do a show that could make a statement, but also could entertain. Because I think if you don't entertain people, you're lost, you know? They lose their focus. Nobody wants a lecture. Everybody wants to be entertained. So what you've got to do is you've got to... William Rose was an expatriate American who lived in England for many, many years. And he wrote wonderful films for Ealing comedies, all those wonderful Genevieve. He wrote wonderful British comedies. And he and I made a film once called The Russians Are Coming. The Russians Are Coming. It was the height of the Cold War.
You got a private showing in the Kremlin, didn't you?
Yes. Khrushchev was banging his shoe at the United Nations, and nobody had ever used, the press had never used the word détente. And William Rose, sitting there in the Channel Islands in Jersey, he and I spent a month together, and we wrote this film, this bizarre film about a Russian submarine running aground off Cape Cod somewhere. And it was disguised almost as a farce. It took it right to the edge of farce. The word capitalist, the word communist is not used in that film. And yet it shook up, I tell you. The first screening in Washington was for the Vice President of the United States. It was screened in Moscow. It was 6 times screened in the Kremlin. I was invited to Moscow 2 weeks later. And then I couldn't get back into America because everyone thought I was some sort of Canadian pinko, you know, that was going to bring down the government.
Tell me about that showing in Moscow, though. Did they fate you? Did they? Why? It
was very interesting. No, it was very, no, in those days, nobody went past the Iron Curtain. I got this visa, was delivered to my hotel room, the Dorchester Hotel, by someone from the Russian embassy. The Canadian government said I could go to Russia if I got a visa, but I wouldn't get one. I said, well, I've already got one. And they said, how'd you get it? And I said, I was invited. Well, who invited you? I said, well, I made a movie, and I guess they're interested in it, and they've invited me. The government, I guess, I don't know. Ilya Lopert is in Moscow, and he's the head of United Artists, and he speaks Russian. They said, okay, you can go. So I went. And you know, if they don't like something, the Russians go, they make this funny, weird noise. And so I was sitting in this 2,000-seat theater, the Film Workers Union Theater, whatever the hell it was, bigger than Radio City. And there was someone translating the film as it was going on simultaneously. Bondarchuk was there, all the filmmakers were there, the Russian great directors, right? The big editor was sitting beside him, this woman with a cropped hair, and then the Russian submarine started to threaten the people of this little town in the film. And Theo Bakel was speaking Russian, everybody's speaking Russian, because I had them speak Russian in the film. And so they were really identifying with it. And he says, if you don't think, I'm going to blow this whole town to pieces. And everybody went, shh. Here we go again. Why are they showing this film? The Russians are the heavies again, the villains. And then a little boy falls. And all of a sudden, from a steeple, and everyone turns. And all of a sudden, the life of this child is imperiled. And who saves him?
The Russians.
The Russians, of course, because they know all about circuses and pyramids, and they climb up on each other's shoulders, blah, 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 and they save the child.
So the shushing stopped, and
the shushing stopped, and they all started to cry, and then they started to clap rhythmically, and it was
great moment.
It was one of the greatest moments, because all of a sudden I realized that William Rose had written such a wonderful little allegory. He had written a story about a group of people, a group of American people in a Russian submarine, and Alan Arkin, who was kind of the star, who couldn't understand why, and Carl Reiner, this sophisticated American writer, and they both discussed what was happening to each other because of what they've been told. You know, if you're told that people are villains all your life, you assume they are, and a threat to you, whatever. So anyway, at the height of the Cold War, here's this film, and I tell you, it was a great, great joy for me, because that's who I made the film for. I made the film for Russians and for Americans.
You still obsessed with directing? Still going to go on? Don't see yourself stopping anytime?
Many years ago, I was standing on a deck out here in Malibu at Willie Wyler's house. William Wyler was a god to me. He was a mentor, and I just thought he was the best director I had ever met. And I sidled up to him and I said, "When's it all over, Willie?" And he was coughing and puffing on a cigar, and he turned to me and he says, "It's all over when your legs give out, kid." So I've taken good care of my legs. You see, that's why I was playing tennis this morning. I like to ski, and it's a physical job. People don't realize that, you know. Who was it that said, if you want to be a good director, just find a great pair of shoes? You're on your feet 14 hours a day, and, you know, it's a tough grind. But I think maybe I have one or two more in me.
Norman Jewison, we don't have to wish you luck on Oscar night because you know you've already won. But thank you very much for being with us on the program. It's been a great pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me back.
Thank you very much.